Right, I think we can get started. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining our webinar on accessibility. I'm super excited that so many people came here and committed time to listen to us. The reason we are organizing this webinar is, and maybe we can move to the second slide. So I give a very short introduction. So the reason we organize this webinar is because we, as the Osom Studio, we are a WordPress agency, and a lot of our clients are asking questions about accessibility because there is going to be a change in the European law on a European level in June this year. So we got started to be bombarded with questions about that and what to do, what you should do, what you shouldn't do. And that's why we reached out to our friends at GrackleDocs, who are experts, who are subject matter experts here, to organize something for, let's say, for the community, for our clients, for our partners, and for the broader public, so that there is still plenty of time until June to address the accessibility matters on your websites. And this is how this webinar has been born. And I will pass now to Anne, who will be leading the webinar further on. If anything's, please feel free also to ask questions in the chat. There will be separate question and answer section at the end of the webinar. But if you want to ask something, not forget about asking this later on. Please type it in chat, and then we will be answering the questions. So yeah, I think Anne, you're good to go, and I will mute now.
Well, thank you so much. And hello, everyone. Good morning or good afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Dr. Ann Nettler. Ann is certainly fine. It's my pleasure to be here with OSOM today. I get to serve as the Vice President for Consulting with GrackleDocs. GrackleDocs is an end-to-end digital accessibility company. And I won't bore you with a whole lot about me. I'll just say that I have about 18 years in the disability rights, digital access, policy, strategic planning field. And it's my pleasure to get to do things like this and share this information because it truly is critical. And as we get started, I always like to start just with a little bit of housekeeping. Like it was said, if you have a question and you don't want to forget it, if you don't have access to the chat, you can go ahead and type it in the Q&A, and then we'll make sure that it gets addressed, but feel free to do that at any point. I will leave time for questions at the end as well. And as we get started, I'd like to start with a customer service example. So when we're marketing, one of the most important things is connecting with our clients or our soon-to-be clients or our soon-to-be customers. And in this example, we want to connect with you. Which of the following options would you choose so that we can keep you informed about all the exciting things that are happening with our company? Would you choose option A or option B? Because this is how we'll make sure that we stay, in communication with you. And keep you informed of everything we're doing. Now, if you're staring at the screen, what you've noticed by now is that option A is a black box and option B is an identical black box. This is a trick and isn't a trick. Because if something isn't accessible, when an image is not accessible, let's say I am someone with a visual impairment, or I am blind, or I am someone who needs to use assistive technology for a different reason. If an image is inserted and isn't accessible, meaning it doesn't have descriptive alternative text behind it, then all I'm getting is the equivalent of this black box. My software will come up to it and say, image blank. Image blank. So I wouldn't be able to choose from these real examples. Option A being an image of a person's hands holding a cell phone with the text message, or option B, email. There's a person's hands typing on a keyboard and an envelope kind of superimposed over top of it. This is a huge difference. Think about how many people may be excluded from the way that we market, the way that we reach out to future clients, customers, community members, simply because the options we put forth aren't accessible. The things I'd like to talk about today are the three things that CMOs, chief marketing officers, or anyone really in marketing of any kind need to understand when it comes to digital accessibility. I want to make sure we cover the landscape, the legal landscape of digital accessibility. We're going to talk about the ROI, or the return on investment for digital access. And then we're going to talk about how to increase reach while decreasing risk. And so that we're on the same page, Georgetown University's School of Law defines digital accessibility as something that refers to the inclusive practice of removing barriers that prevent interaction with or access to websites, digital tools, and technologies by people with disabilities. So in other words, when things are accessible, there are no barriers for anyone when it comes to accessing the web, apps, processes online, because everyone, even those with disabilities, those who might use assistive technology, are able to access it in the same way that someone who does not have a disability could access it. And when we design content to be accessible, we are designing resources that are for everyone. We're ensuring that everyone can use what we have worked so hard to develop. They can use our website, they can use our app, they can use our tools. And when we do this, we are providing information, we're providing resources, we're providing commerce that is integral to modern society. These are all pieces that have to do directly with education, with communication, with employment, with entertainment. No matter what field you are in, there is an aspect of marketing that goes with it. And if we aren't including accessibility when we are creating that marketing and creating our content, we have left out a huge amount of the population. I want to talk a little bit about the user experience. What is it like for someone who may have a variety of different types of disability, or persons with different types of disabilities, when they're trying to access content? So the first one is as if we were to look through someone else's eyes. Now, in the world, approximately 9 to 10% of all men are colorblind. And when we think about colorblindness, usually we would think maybe that someone sees only in shades of gray, black, and white. And while that is possible, usually an individual has what's really referred to as color weakness. So if you see what's on the screen, on the left of our chart, it says normal vision, and then the colors red, yellow, orange, green, blue, and magenta are shown. And I am someone who would identify as having normal color vision. And so those colors look to me like standard colors. However, the three following columns to the right are respective of an individual who may have different types of color blindness or color weakness. So when there is actually red, as I would see red on the screen, their version of red may look like what is in any of those three columns. Their version of yellow might look like what's in those three columns. If you'll notice kind of across the board, the two center columns do not see red or orange hardly at all. The furthest column on the right is heavy in red, but does not see green or orange. Imagine the content that we have created, how much color is in the content that we create. When we create something, we want to make sure that the way we use the content, the way we use color, is still going to be visible for everyone. And so I think it's always good to have an idea of what it could be like in someone else's shoes. So this is a screen reader example. And what you see is a handout that would be posted online, perhaps in a class for students. And by listening, I'm going to hit the caption button. But if you are someone who is using the captions, please note that it is garbled, and that's not an error.
Handout for class. Physis themist important PC affiliated also ilmestlicher resulten information you will receive in failing. The class cannot class make Sir your ever part responsible for lack of fully understand it. Preparation formicless.
So that didn't make sense to me either. And that's an example of someone who might need to use a screen reading software. Screen reading software is as if you were to turn off your monitor and the software will read to you all the different aspects of the programs, the documents, the websites that you might access with your computer. And the person would navigate those different parts of their computer, those different websites, just with keyboard commands. But in this case, if I'm looking at the document, I see handout for class. This is the most important piece of information you will receive in this class. Make sure you read every part of it and fully understand it. Failure to do so will most likely result in you failing the class. I cannot be responsible for your lack of preparation for my class. If I'm someone who is not blind or visually impaired, I can stare at that document, read it, and then I get the message of how important this content is going to be to me, how much I need to take seriously the following pages and make sure that I'm well aware because my success is dependent upon the information here. But if I am someone who is blind or visually impaired and I'm using a screen reading software, I have no idea of the importance of this content. How is it fair that I am then held accountable at the same standard and level as those who could easily access this material? This is exactly like an experience that someone might have on a website, in an app, when viewing an ad, if it hasn't been made accessibly. Here's an example. These are 3 different examples of what someone who has a learning disability might see. I always say might because disability affects everyone differently. And so this isn't exactly how everyone with a learning disability sees text content, but there are 3 really strong examples. The first one, all the way to the left, is called Rivers. And in reality, this is actual text from a book, but in this person's mind's eye, their brain squishes the letters together, leaving white space in like almost as if it is white rivers running down the page. Imagine trying to read that content if it's on your website, if it's in your marketing, if it's in your product descriptions, and reading it in context. This person would absolutely use reading software, even though they are not visually impaired. The second one is called swirls. In this case, the text to someone without a learning disability would seem standard on the page. However, for this person, in their mind's eye, they can focus clearly on what is at the very center of their vision. But everything around that, like concentric circles or swirls, it's as though you were to drop a drop of water in a still pond. And they see this blurred circular design after it. Imagine trying to read content without assistive technology because their assistive technology won't work, because the content is not accessible. How is this person going to understand the information about your products or the services that you offer if it isn't accessible for them? And the last one is called coding. This is similar to an experience that someone who has dyslexia may experience. And in this case, the person's mind's eye has replaced certain letters with numbers. And if we're careful reading through it, what it says is this message serves to prove how our minds can do amazing things, impressive things. In the beginning, it was hard, but now on this line, your mind is reading it automatically without even thinking about it. I've probably read that out loud about 75 times, and I still struggle to do that. So imagine that this is someone's mind's eye, and this is what they see every time they see our content, if they can't use their technology to view it. Next, I want to jump into the legal landscape of what we're talking about. Because disability rights, depending on what country you are in, they are always human rights. And in some countries, they're also considered civil rights. And all the different digital accessibility laws that are present in various different countries, the vast majority of them refer back to the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. These are a set of very detailed guidelines developed by a web content organization, and they have 4 basic pillars. The first is perceivable. In other words, can I interact with it, whether I'm using assistive technology or just on my own? Is it available to all of my senses, especially vision and hearing? Can my assistive technology, when I'm giving it those commands, when I'm working through the site, when I'm working through that ad, can it actually interact with the text? Can it interact with the buttons or play the video? Is it operable? Can I use it? Not only can I find it, is it perceivable, but can I use it? Can I use the button? Can I use the form with my assistive technology? Will it be accessible? Understandable, very simply, does it make sense? Is it laid out in a way that would make sense, that would avoid confusion or ambiguity? And then robust. Can a wide range of technologies. This doesn't just mean assistive technology for individuals with disabilities. This means individuals who are using perhaps old technology. Perhaps the only tool that they have to access the web is their smartphone. Perhaps they don't have access to strong Wi-Fi connections. And they are trying to access the content. Is it robust enough, and is it made accessibly that all of those individuals can still use it? So the specific areas that we're highlighting today are the European Union laws, Canadian laws, United States laws, and all of those together have some shared commonalities in terms of the legal framework. Any aspect of a product, good, service, education, or employment offered through the electronic environment that's covered under those laws must be fully accessible to people with disabilities. If we fail to do that, it can be considered discrimination. All 3 of those laws, the laws in Canada, the EU, and in the US, all reference the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines, WCAG, what we just went over. And in all of these laws, the individual who owns the content, the individual who has contracted for the content, is responsible for the content, even if that content is actually created by a third party. So let's say I use a third party to manage my website, and I can post information, but I can't control the code. I can't control the nitty-gritty behind the web. Well, if that code isn't accessible, I am still legally responsible for it, even though I cannot change it. Because I have said that this website, my website, is the only way you can access the goods or the services that I am providing. And now here's some specifics. In the European Union law, it relates to consumer-facing or commerce. That's what the law focuses on. And it could include, depending on what country you are in within the EU, there are differences between countries. Sometimes it is mandatory, in addition to making things accessible, that you're providing accessibility training to staff. It might be mandatory that there is regular accessibility monitoring and reporting, and that there are accessibility conformance standards. That means a standard or a statement that you place on a website that may not be fully accessible, stating where it is not fully accessible, and providing someone with the means by which to ask for better access. The EU law currently focuses on version 2.1 of WCAG. Version 2.2 came out back in May of this past year, and it is in the process of being changed to version 2.2. And there are 3 levels in WCAG: level A, AA, and AAA. AA is the general standard across the board. And under the EU laws, disability rights are human rights. I also wanted to touch on the UK law just quickly, and that has to do with the Equality Act of 2010, and it also references WCAG 2.1 AA. In Britain, they also have the introduction of what's called BS 8878, and that is specific to PDF documents. So there are very specific laws for the UK as well. In Canada, there is an Ontarians with Disabilities Act, and it relates to public and private entities. So not just consumer facing, not just commerce, public and private. The Accessible Canada Act relates to public government entities. So there's two separate laws at play. Both of them reference version 2.0 of WCAG, and this applies to digital content created on or after 2012. The deadline for compliance is this year for those laws. In the United States, very recently, in fact, in April of this past year, the Americans with Disabilities Act, Title II of that act, which references public entities, was updated to include digital accessibility. It references version 2.1 of WCAG, and there are some looming deadlines for the United States. April 24th, 2026, if you have a population of 50,000 or more that you serve, and then April 26, 2027, if you serve less than 50,000 people. In the United States, disability rights are considered civil rights in addition to being human rights. So at the end of the day, what has to be accessible? Active web and app content, information and experiences. So that's text, images, sounds, videos, forms, documents, anything like that that is on the web. This includes if you offer online trainings or online courses, websites, your main site and any subsidiary sites, even if the content is managed by a third-party organization. Social media posts. This is huge. How often do we use social media? Social media posts on or after whatever the respective deadline for the law that you have to follow is. That is huge. Web-based processes. So if you have to fill out an application, if it's event registration, you've posted something and there is a link that someone has to fill out so that they can attend your webinar or they can attend your event. That has to be accessible, even if you're using, let's say, a third-party ticketing site to provide that access. And then any application that is used by your organization, even if it is maintained by a third party or is a third party app altogether, like those that might be used. I know if I want to buy tickets to an event, I have an app on my phone where I can go and look for tickets for any kind of event I could think of. If that is how my company is marketing or is the only way someone can attend my event, and that app that I am saying, hey, this is what you have to use, if it isn't accessible, I am liable. I'm legally liable, even though that's not my app, because that's the only way that I've decided that someone could attend my event. So let's jump into return on investment. So hopefully you've already seen some ways that the return on investment can happen if you're focusing on digital accessibility, because ultimately inclusive marketing is accessible marketing. Something I find always incredibly important to talk about is that in the world, there's 1.2 billion with a B people with disabilities. That is a huge number. That's 1 in 6 people worldwide that identify as having a disability. I went through and I did a bit of a SWOT analysis, looking at the importance of including digital access and what could happen if we don't. If we are following the updated rules, we are ensuring alignment. We are mitigating risk immediately. And when we adopt a strategic digital accessibility approach, when we start doing better, we produce an immediate return on investment. We have instantaneously reduced our legal risk. We also have impacted the retention and acquisition of current and future clients. Remember, I said 1.2 billion people in this world have disabilities. Think about how many people we may currently be excluding from our marketing, from our sales, from our commerce, from using services that we create, whether that's a community service or a fee for service. We remove systemic barriers that have been in place for decades. The reality is, when we first started using the internet, when we first started using websites and apps, we had no idea what digital accessibility was. But now that we know, we need to do better. We need to reduce that barrier. We need to reduce what's called ableism, which is where we make an assumption that if we are able-bodied, if I am able-bodied, that other people will access things, use them in the same way, for the same purpose, in the same amount of time, and in the same manner as I will. And we all know that's not true. We also immediately support the civil and/or human rights of an entire population. People with disabilities represent $8 trillion of disposable income annually. And if we add their friends and family to that number, that's $13 trillion of disposable income every year. If you are someone in marketing, you know what that means. $8 trillion. Imagine how much of that market is currently being untapped because we simply haven't created things to be accessible for all of those potential consumers. And these are individuals just like everyone else. They need the products or the goods or the resources that we're providing. All we have to do is make sure that they're available, usable, perceivable. Some weaknesses. If we're applying accessibility principles, oftentimes right now, it's not happening equally. It's usually divided. There might be different silos within a company where some groups within that company are applying accessibility principles and some are not. This results in gaps in digital access. When there is a gap, we have lost consumers, we have lost retention of consumers, we have potentially put ourselves at legal risk. If there is inconsistent awareness of digital accessibility standards and principles of laws across departments, we are opening ourselves up for risk. Oftentimes we have key staff that do a lot of the content creation who simply have never been trained on how to edit and make sure that things are accessible. They're out there creating content every day, sometimes multiple times a day, things that might post to social media or online, and they simply don't know how to do it the right way. Existing software and vendor policies. Think about the policies you might have within your own organizations. Often do not contain requirements for digital accessibility. In other words, we are not holding accountable individuals who we do business with to make sure that what they are providing us is in fact accessible. Some opportunities. We become poised to make strategic changes, garner high-level buy-in, and immediately decrease legal risk when we create a strategic digital access plan. Simply having the plan and starting to follow it does that for us immediately. You have the opportunity to become a model of digital access in your field. Digital accessibility also improves access and increases usability for everyone. Everyone benefits from needing clear instructions. Individuals could have inconsistent internet access. Maybe I'm someone and I have a laptop, but I don't have internet at my home. And so I'm dependent on going to a coffee shop to watch this video or to view your website, or to maybe on my phone, I don't have a plan, so I need Wi-Fi. If I don't have strong internet and I try to load those images, the image, if you've experienced that before, I know I have, might not load. If that image was made accessibly, then the description of the image will load every time, and I have not lost any content. I might have old or outdated technology. I might be someone who my first language simply isn't English or isn't the common language in the country where I am. And if I am trying to learn, if I'm trying to get information, if I can watch a video and turn on the captions and the captions are accurate, I can still get that information. I might be less tech savvy, or I might have a disability. These are all reasons why making things accessible is important. 31.1% of our world's population uses assistive technology. That's 2.5 billion people. Literally a 1/3 of the world's population uses assistive technology. Now, if you remember, only 1.2 billion people have a disability. That means there's an additional 1.3 billion people that use assistive tech when they're on the web, when they're in an app, because it simply makes things easier. That means that they're also not necessarily getting all of our content. Some threats. Users with disabilities have identified specific access issues when we interact online, whether it's an online system, a web-based content, a mobile app, when accessing personal or confidential information. There have already been identified barriers. There have been identified issues. This causes a barrier for that person. It makes it almost impossible for them to use, understand, view, get anything from all of this great content that we've provided. We risk reputational damage resulting from potential discrimination claims or lawsuits. There can be absolute realized revenue loss as potential customers, students, anyone with a disability is going to go somewhere else. And frankly, they usually take their friends and family with them. That's what bumps that number to $13.1 trillion of disposable income. And I can understand that, because if I have a friend who has a disability and they can't use an aspect of a business, or that business isn't made accessible for them, their resources, then I'm not shopping there either. And there's an additional risk of revenue loss and sponsorship loss as well. If it's becoming publicized that perhaps our content isn't accessible. There are billions of potentially inaccessible reports, documents, essential communications created every day and sent directly to individuals with disabilities. So let's talk about how we can increase our reach and decrease our risk. One of the first things that I always talk about is how we use text and color. You'll remember how we talked about individuals that may have color weakness, and we saw that color scale. When we're using text and color, we want to make sure that we are not just using color to add emphasis to something. So on the example on the screen, to the left, there is an image of two buttons. They appear to be the same color. On one button to the left, it says running. The other button says stopped. This is what it might look like to someone with a form of color weakness. Whereas if you do not have color weakness, you might see the image on the right. The button that is labeled running is green. The button that is labeled stopped is red. If those words were not there, in other words, if I hadn't used both the descriptive word and the color, the person who is experiencing color weakness would not know which to choose. Imagine this was a button that said, yes, send me this email, or no, don't send me this email. Images. We've mentioned images a few times, and I've talked about something called alt text, ALT, or alternative text. It is so easy to add alt text to an image. Alt text does not appear visually, so you or I would not see it visually. What it is a descriptive, usually a sentence or two, that is hidden behind the image that is only viewable or accessible by screen reading software or assistive technology. And that description is supposed to briefly provide whatever the important information is that someone would gain by just looking at the picture. So it's the content in context. When we use alt text, we also provide Google with additional information to use to understand images and to use in an SEO. So good alt text increases our hits. It increases our findability because engines like Google can identify that alt text and will use it in their processes. Videos. Captions are a must. They need to be good captions. If you've ever used, let's say, YouTube, and you've watched a video on YouTube, if you click that CC button in the bottom right-hand corner and an image pops up and it reads the equivalent of captions are auto-generated, those captions do not meet legal requirements. Unedited, auto-generated captions do not meet standards. Captions must be at least 99% accurate. They have to be edited for punctuation, and they have to identify who is speaking if the speaker changes. We also want to be mindful of audio only or visual only content. Well, how do we do that? If you have a video that you want to post, a marketing video, watch the video on mute and then listen to the video without actually looking at it, or have someone that doesn't know the content of the video do those things for you. And then ask them, what was confusing? What did you miss? Those are the things that someone who is blind or someone who is deaf would miss from that content. Social media, so important. Your social media marketing tools, do your social media marketing tools, your software, your staff that post content, are they posting accessible content? So the image to the right is a screen grab from LinkedIn from one of our GrackleDocs posts. So when you post to social media, when you're posting an image, does it have alt text? Has it been made accessibly? Remember that billions of potentially inaccessible reports, documents, and essential communication, like social media posts, are created and sent directly to individuals with disabilities every day. So when I ask, do your social media marketing tools and software and staff post accessible content, are you sure? Forms. How many of us have forms on a website? And we need them. We need our potential consumer, our potential customer, our potential user of our service to use these forms. This is an example of what someone who is using assistive technology might encounter if they're encountering an inaccessible form. The image on the left is almost identical to the image on the right. It's actually a form that you would fill out on Grackle's website. However, if you notice, the labels for those form boxes where you would type your information weren't made accessibly. So if I'm using a screen reader, I have no idea what information I'm supposed to put in those boxes. I also don't have that box at the bottom that lets me agree to the privacy policy. And if I don't check that box, I actually can't click the submit button. But I don't have the box at all. I have been fundamentally prevented from getting any information or interacting with that content. And what about hyperlinks as we come to the close here? We've all probably seen something that says, click here for more. Click here for more information. In the days of cybersecurity that we live in right now, I am very cautious when I go to click on a link. If I'm using a screen reader, that when I come to that link, it's going to say link here. If I don't know where that link is going to take me and I don't know what information I'm about to find at the end of that link, I'm not going to click on it. As opposed to using a link the right way. For more client testimonials on our products, or find more client testimonials on our products page, the link is products. And I know exactly what I'm going to find there. I'm going to find client testimonials. If that's what I want, I know it's going to take me to the products page. I'll click on that link because now I feel confident that I will be taken to a safe place. And I can decide whether I really want to go there or not. That affects someone with a disability and someone who does not have a disability. And so as you're wrapping up and we're thinking about how we can determine whether or not what we're doing is accessible, I'm going to give you some questions to start you off. Is everything laid out in a way that simply makes sense? Is it linear? Can I scroll through it? If I'm going to the next page, is it laid out in a similar fashion so I know where to look for information? Will the images or pictures be beneficial for someone who accesses content differently? In other words, is that image necessary? What is it providing? Am I using hyperlinks the right way? Let me look over my content and double check that I've got hyperlinks and I'm using them in a way that makes sense. Can I download whatever it is to my computer? If I can download it, if it's a document, then it's usually more accessible. Does this video that I want to post have good captions? If I'm on my website or if I'm in this marketing piece that I'm putting forward, can I use my keyboard and even just tab through the content? Can I use the tab to move to the different parts in the form, for example? Does it move logically? Could someone navigate this content with a screen reader? And then have you considered having a website audit? A website audit should be something that's done, in my opinion, by a company that will use human auditors, that's going to look at all the specific pieces in the website and give you a really detailed view of what isn't accessible, tell you how to fix it, and provide you with detailed information. So those are the questions that I would give you. And now I would be more than happy to take some questions in return. So I will turn it back over to my Osom colleague for some questions. And what I'm going to do also is open up that Q&A. I don't see any questions posted in there yet, but feel free to post them there as well. And we'll begin with some questions.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Anne. And I have a couple of questions, because I have a feeling that one thing is to go through the, let's say, that part, and the other is some, let's say, concrete cases that might interest our webinar listeners. So my first question, and starting, chronologically, from the legislative perspective, is you mentioned that in the EU, the content that is consumer-facing content has to be accessible. And I wanted to make sure how everyone should interpret this. Is it the content that is on a e-commerce site that consumers are facing so they can buy a pair of shoes, or taking it one step further, all kinds of content that is accessible through browser, or maybe commercial content that is served by like professional company, and by professional I mean B2B. So a company that sells only to other companies, for example. So I'm curious, how this should be interpreted by our listeners. Where is the line between the content that is accessible or not?
Sure. So in the EU, it has to do with commerce sites. So that means that so it's kind of an all of the above. If it is a site that is selling, let's say, I'll use your example, selling shoes, and I am a member of the public, and I would like to buy shoes, then that full site, as their commerce, their customer-facing site, must be accessible up to that WCAG 2.1 right now, AA level. If it is something that, if it is a company that is a sales company, a company that is in sales, a commerce company, and they are providing information about their products on their website, or even just the background of their company, then that also has to be accessible, because it is still commerce related. Anything that is commerce, even if my commerce is to another business as opposed to a member of the public, that business is my end user. So I would say that also would need to be accessible, because it is still information. It's still the process by which someone would purchase or would engage in the services that I am providing from a commerce perspective.
All right. So if I'm a manufacturer of laces for other shoemakers, if they can make an RFP through my website, I would fall into the new regulation.
That's my understanding.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And how about companies that are outside of, let's say, EU is a big example, but how about a business that is outside of EU but want to sell to EU? Let's say they are a Swiss-based business, or I don't know, some other business out of EU, but want to operate their website and want to make their products available to EU citizens.
Sure. So if the business itself is outside of that country, then technically they're not held by that law. Here's the caveat, or however, depends on what you're selling. If I am selling, let's say I am based in the United States, but I do business with companies that are in the EU. Well, let's say my business is a seller to seller. So I'm providing a good or a service online that's an electronic service. It's something that will be accessed online. And I am selling that to a business in the European Union, and they are then going to turn around and sell it to their clients. They are very likely not going to do business with me if my content doesn't meet the requirements of the law that they have to follow. The same thing in the United States, for example. So in the United States, it's public entities. That means government agencies. It means public universities. It means public libraries. All of those sorts of things that are government funded must meet this new accessibility requirement. I might work with a publisher, a publishing company that's located in the EU. And that publisher says, well, I'm not in America, so I don't have to provide you with content, this electronic published content, books or whatever, that meets these standards. And I would say, well, if you are not going to provide me with that standard, I'm not doing business with you, because I have to ensure that what I provide to my people is accessible. So so in other words, there could still be business loss even if you are outside of that country.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because you have to be responsible for the supply chain, like the car manufacturers. At the end of the day, the whole car broke or not broke or had a malfunction, so that the one that is at the end of the whole chain has to ensure the subsequent suppliers meet the standards. So it's like
Exactly.
okay, perfect. And how about these in US? It's quite popular. I heard predator lawsuits. They are mainly targeted at e-commerce businesses. Is it like how should we treat this for the US market? Is it only because these businesses are vulnerable in a sense that are not accessible, or rather they have a big turnaround, big businesses? How do you treat that, and what to think about this? Is it going to Europe now because of the new regulations that a lot of companies will be hunted because of the not meeting the regulations?
Sure. So it certainly could. I'll be the first. I live in the United States, so I will be the first to admit that Americans tend to be very litigious, or they tend to go towards a lawsuit earlier than most other countries. So I think that is one of the reasons why it is so prevalent in the United States. It is prevalent on those online websites, especially if it is. You mentioned commerce websites. It is also incredibly prevalent that individuals are suing in the United States for on university websites and sporting websites that are associated with universities, because there's so much online content there. So is it going to travel over to the EU and to other countries? It certainly could, because now the laws are being quite specific and they're changing and updating. So I would say, is it possible? Yes. Is the United States a more litigious country? Also, yes. So I hope that we don't see it that way. What I would much rather see is individuals notifying companies that they have found something inaccessible and then giving that company an opportunity to fix it. Because we need to be a community in all of this. It is not, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon when you talk about digital accessibility.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and talking about this, like extending this a little bit further, I'm also thinking that if anyone, like, it's a human nature, if anyone is forced to do something, the natural pushback, is born. Like, this is like, you do this, oh, but maybe I can, I can avoid this. So I have a feeling that it might be the case also for every business that is forced to do something regarding accessibility instead of wanting to do something in the first place. So like I'm playing a little bit of a devil's advocate here, but wouldn't the companies be already addressing the accessibility issues if this was such a, let's say, the price would be so big, to address this? I might know the answer, but I still ask the question.
Sure. So honestly, people don't know. There is such a lack of awareness of the population of individuals with disabilities in the consumer world. Because oftentimes and over history, individuals with disabilities have often been discounted, or assumptions are made that everyone can already access this content. Most of the time, people don't realize that they are in fact blocking content, blocking information from a huge group of others. And that's one of the reasons I think this webinar today is so important. In America, we have a phrase and we call it, it's the best kept secret. And in many ways, the addition of individuals with disabilities to the consumer market, especially when it comes to digital accessibility, to me seems like the quote unquote best kept secret in marketing and in commerce. Because honestly, in my opinion, I've been doing this for 18, 19 years now. I have never come across a business or an organization that already knew what they could be gaining and the amount of lives they could be impacting by simply creating accessible content.
Obvious examples are the one from your presentation about the SEO. One HTML element called alt text is affecting your website SEO. And for example, we are doing this for our clients, where we fill all of the alt text for the whole website. And the client is getting not only accessibility, but they are thinking most of the time so far about the gains they can do with the SEO, because the guideline, like the principles coming from Google for good practices for the SEO. At the same time, it is helping people using assistive technologies, and this is only one example, and there are so many more examples. And
Absolutely.
where I refer to this, this is the part that I know the answer to the question. But when I was listening to and the suffering I sometimes get from buying something on poorly designed, from the, like, I don't have any impairments, but from purely user experience perspective, checkout process is prohibitive. And if it is prohibitive for me, and what I do, I switch the I look for something else. I look for other e-commerce platforms. So I guess that this is only like multiplied tenfold or more for people with disabilities, where when they have to buy anything over the net.
Absolutely. And imagine how frustrating it is if you keep trying and trying and trying with your assistive technology and you can't get anywhere. What am I going to do if I find that to be the case? I'm going to look for a similar product from a different company where I can actually purchase it. And then that company has lost business, and that's not what we want to have happen.
And let's assume some of our listeners want to improve, like get some results quickly, and they, like, I don't know, they will want getting up to date with the EU Accessibility Act quickly, and they will paste that phrase into Google, and there will be search results for getting the accessibility up and running in no time, right? And then there will be a ton of quick ways, like whatever the quick way will be. And what's your opinion on that?
I thank you for asking that question. So what you're referring to when you do a Google search and you're looking for that, how do I meet that WCAG, whether it's EU or Canada or the US or the UK, what will immediately come up are lots of companies that would like to sell you what they usually call either a widget or an overlay, an accessibility widget or an overlay. Usually that appears as a small icon in the bottom corner. If someone has purchased this, it will appear as a small icon on the bottom, usually right corner of the website, and a user can click on it, and it gives them all these options, to have something read out loud, to change the color, to change the size of the text. And what those companies will tell you is that they automatically make the site fully WCAG accessible. That is not true. Those companies, those products actually make the site less accessible. There have been many lawsuits and complaints against companies that create those quick fix products, because when you actually use that, it puts a new level of website code on top of what's already there, which means if I use assistive technology, I already have my technology. I don't need that to change something for me because my technology will already do it. So now my technology has to try to break through that widget, that overlay, so that I can even get to the content. Oftentimes, that extra widget makes the site fully inaccessible to me. So I would say if it looks too good to be true, it is. There was actually recently a ruling in the United States where a company that creates those widgets has to pay a very large amount of money and was forced to stop selling all of their products, their widgets for access, digital access, because it was proven that they said those widgets would create 100% accessible websites, and it was proven that that widget actually makes the site inaccessible. So they were lying to their consumers. So please beware. Usually there is no easy fix. If it looks too good to be true, it is. But saying that, there are resources available, like the resources that OSOM offers. Grackle partners with OSOM. So, we together we can offer a lot of different resources, things like being able to check the website, like you were just mentioning, and how you put in the alt text, for example, for all the images on your client's sites. That's huge. That is a huge accessibility win. There are quick checkers that you could use that check a portion of the WCAG guidelines. There is a free, it's called Wave, W-A-V-E, Wave Checker extension for Google Chrome. It is free. It will check the website for some of the WCAG criteria, and it will give you a report. So you have at least a start, but that is not all inclusive. There are about 60 other checkpoints that it does not check. So you really need to go with a company that is experienced, that can provide an audit, that can use their own software to check the content and then help you fix it.
Yeah, that's exactly like we are only I don't know if we are even scratching the surface with this webinar. With the amount of procedures to be checked is enormous, which on one hand sounds like a huge burden on the business. On the other, the initial ones that we cover during this webinar are so impactful that they are making so much difference for the business. And I would say that these are my questions for you. So I don't pepper you.
One more question.
Yeah, there is one more from the listener.
And so this says, I've seen some resources stating if a product is live before June 2025, it has until 2030 to be compliant. Is this true? I'm not sure which specific law you're referencing, because there's lots of different ones and they have different deadlines and different content areas. I'm not familiar with a 2030 extension if the content is live before then. However, that doesn't mean that it isn't the case. I would check the language of that law specifically and if you want, you could even we could try to capture that question and maybe get some more information. because I don't want to misspeak because I'm not sure what law we're referring to. To the point about return on investment, it says, I presume it's better to be compliant sooner and potentially capture that untapped market. Absolutely. The sooner you are compliant, whether the deadline has come or not, the sooner you are getting that untapped market. And frankly, the sooner we are being even more inclusive and respecting the human rights of our own friends, neighbors, and family members. Not only is it a huge return on investment, it also happens to be the right thing to do. So absolutely doing that sooner than later. And especially if you live in a country where there is a looming deadline, the sooner we act to achieve full digital accessibility, the more legal risk mitigation we are ensuring for ourselves. So absolutely, it is always better to be proactive.
Maybe any other questions? Anyone has something at the back of their head? All right, I think then we can wrap up. It was, for me, it was a pleasure to be here to get to know that, and I think this is transcribed as well, so there will be something to return to if anyone missed part of the initial webinar.
Yes, absolutely. It's being recorded as well, so we'll use that transcript. We'll make sure that there are clear, good captions that meet those standards before we provide anything out. But thank you so much. Amazing. It's been such a pleasure doing this webinar with you and with our fellow collaborators at OSOM, and everyone that's been here. Thank you so much for attending. Thanks for giving us time out of your very busy schedules. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.
Thank you. Take care.